Good morning. Good morning. My name is Nduta, and I am a policy leader fellow here at the School of Transnational Governance at the EUI. And I volunteered to make a commentary on a book that has been particularly important to me as the university commemorates Black History Month. I think I would like to start off by saying I've had an affinity for books since I was a child. I love books. It's, I think, one of the easiest ways to communicate or to get information. I had a severe stammer as a child, and so I could disappear into books and they wouldn't judge me back. They wouldn't laugh at me. It would be an easy relationship. My parents instilled that love of books just even to acquire information. So I've always found, even now as a medium of information and entertainment, I gravitate towards books. At some point in my life, I was working in London or maybe I should say, when I did my master's, I did it abroad. And it was the first time I was in a country where my racial identity was a factor. This is not to say that I walked around thinking that I'm not Black. It's obvious. But it's the first time that being Black was first and foremost something that was noticed about me even before I had a chance to represent myself. That was an interesting thing for me because having grown up in Africa, in Black Africa, in an environment with majority Black people, that's not how we communicate. We don't look at each other in terms of race. We might have distinctions, maybe based on tribe or political affiliation or culture or maybe economic status, but it was the first time I had to grapple with race as a factor in my life. It was the first time I observed people responding to me first as a Black person before a person. So I'm also very curious, and of course, I turned to books on this, and I came across Roots by Alex Haley, which is probably one of the most renowned books on the issue of the Black American experience. I did not necessarily want to know much about the Black American experience, but it was what was available, so I decided to start there. Roots is by Alex Haley, as I've just mentioned, and it's initially I thought it was an autobiography, but then I learned later that there have been some challenges with authenticating whether it was actually an autobiography. I would say it's a novelization of an autobiography of Alex Haley's own family and the journey from the Gambia, which is in West Africa, through the slave ships until his own life, circa 1922. And it's fascinating just to see the intergenerational impact of slave trade and of the trauma that's been carried throughout the centuries. I obviously don't have that trauma, but it framed a lot of things for me. I understood certain things that I would not have otherwise understood. And I feel like I have an appreciation of some of the things that I was completely ignorant of. When we look at the issues that are framing our society right now, among what comes front of mind is racial justice. And it can sometimes it's easy to suggest that people can get over it. And perhaps they can. I do think the mind is a fascinating and powerful thing. But in order to get over something, you need to understand it. You need to know the full breadth of it. You need to understand why there is such a sense of injustice. Because there is an injustice, and the truth is that some of these things cannot really be made right. But it was a very helpful starting point for me to understand. I think it's a very well-written book. It's huge. I remember reading a bit of it every day on the train on the way to work, and it was super emotional. Sometimes you'd laugh with the characters, many times you'd cry, other times you'd weep. Many times I had to actually pause and take a breath and say, oh wow, this is quite, traumatic, or it was quite the involving experience reading the book. But it is hands down one of the most interesting books I've read, and very informative, and I think very contemplative.